The air here, even now, carries the scent of cedar and spices. It clings to the heavy tapestries, weaves its way through the cool marble halls, and settles deep into the fabric of my memory. But it was not always so. Once, the air I breathed most deeply was simpler, seasoned with the dust of the street, the distant cries of vendors in the market, and the comforting aroma of my cousin Mordecai's hearth. Yes, my cousin Mordecai. He was more than a cousin, truly. A father, a protector, a quiet anchor in a world that often felt adrift. My parents, peace be upon them, I barely remember. Their faces are like faint sketches on the edge of a scroll, fading with each passing year. It was Mordecai who took me in, a little waif, a tender shoot left unattended, and nurtured me with a love as steady and sure as the rising sun. He worked at the King's Gate, Not a grand position, perhaps, but one that kept him informed, kept his ear to the ground, so to speak. He knew the comings and goings, the whispers that drifted through the city of Susa like desert sand. And he taught me to listen too, not just with my ears, but with my heart. He taught me quiet observation, the subtle art of understanding without drawing attention to oneself. A valuable lesson, as it turned out. Our home was small, 2 rooms perhaps, but always filled with a gentle warmth. In the evenings, after the sun had dipped below the distant Zagros Mountains, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, we would sit. Sometimes he would read from the scrolls, his voice a low, comforting murmur. Other times we would simply share a meal of bread and lentils, the silence between us as rich and nourishing as any feast. I learned to embroider, to weave, to prepare simple medicines from herbs. A quiet life, yes, but a full one. A life I thought would stretch out before me, predictable as the changing seasons. We were exiles, of course, descendants of those whom Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem. It was a truth that sat beneath the surface of our lives, a shared secret. Mordecai, ever wise, had impressed upon me the importance of discretion. Hadassah, he would say, using my Hebrew name, myrtle blossom, let your roots run deep, but let your branches blend. It is not always wise to proclaim all that you are, not in this city, not in this time. I understood. It was a safety, a quiet shield against a world that sometimes looked upon strangers with suspicion. Then came the year of the great feast. Oh, the king's feasts! King Xerxes, a man of immense power, and it seemed an equally immense appetite for spectacle. He was showcasing the vast wealth of his kingdom, the splendor of his glorious majesty, for all the princes and officials from his 127 provinces. 127. Imagine the logistics alone. For 180 days, the wine flowed freely, and the tables groaned under the weight of delicacies. I remember the sounds drifting from the palace walls. Laughter, music, the distant clinking of goblets. It was a constant hum in the background of our city life, a reminder of the grand, opulent world that existed just beyond our quiet streets. We heard tales from the merchants, of gold and silver vessels, of couches inlaid with mother of pearl, of exquisite fabrics. It sounded utterly exhausting, to be honest. 6 months of feasting. Even the most robust stomach must eventually cry for a quiet bowl of broth. And then, as all grand spectacles often do, it ended with a flourish. Or perhaps a crash. Queen Vashti. Ah, Queen Vashti. She had her own feast for the women in the royal palace, a separate celebration, a quieter affair, I imagined. But then, on the 7th day, when the king's heart was merry with wine, he commanded his 7 eunuchs to bring Queen Vashti before him, wearing her royal crown. He wanted to display her beauty to the people and the officials. Now, imagine the scene. The king, a little flushed perhaps, with the merriment of the long celebration, his pride inflated by the adoration of his many guests. And then, the queen, called like a mere ornament to be paraded. I remember the whispers that swept through Susa like a sudden gust of wind. She refused, they said. The queen refused to come. My blood ran cold at the thought. To refuse the king. It was an act of courage, perhaps, or sheer folly, depending on your perspective. Either way, it was unheard of. The king's fury, we learned, was immediate and absolute. His wise men, those who understood law and justice, were consulted. And their verdict? If word got out that the queen had defied the king, it would set a dangerous precedent for all the women in the empire. Every wife would look disdainfully on her husband. A rather dramatic leap, I thought at the time. But then, the male ego has always been a rather delicate flower, easily bruised. So, a royal decree was issued. Queen Vashti was banished, removed from her royal position, and a new decree, even more startling, was proclaimed throughout all the provinces. Every man was to be master in his own house, and most importantly for me, let the king search for beautiful young virgins. My quiet life, the one I had so carefully cultivated with Mordecai, shattered like a dropped clay pot. Beautiful young virgins. My heart sank to my sandals. I knew with a chilling certainty that my name, or rather my appearance, would not escape notice. I had always been told I was comely, a pleasant face, dark hair, eyes that held a certain depth. It was a blessing, I suppose, but now it felt like a curse. Mordecai, bless his heart, tried to reassure me, but I saw the worry etched around his eyes. He knew the gravity of the situation. This was not a request. It was a royal command. There was no refusing the king's eunuchs. They scoured the city, searching, observing. And one day, as I walked to the well, my water jar balanced carefully on my hip, I felt eyes upon me. Not the usual appreciative glances, but a cold, appraising stare. Soon after, the summons came. A polite but firm order. I was to be taken to the king's citadel in Susa, to the harem, under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch in charge of the women. My quiet, domestic world, with its familiar smells and comforting rhythms, was about to be exchanged for one of unimaginable luxury and equally unimaginable uncertainty. Mordecai walked me to the palace gates that day. The air was thick with dust and the murmur of other girls being led away, their faces a mixture of fear and bewildered excitement. He held my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Remember what I told you, Hadassah," he whispered, his voice low. "Do not reveal your people or your family." I nodded, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. It was my secret name, my secret heritage, my secret identity, a heavy cloak to wear, even for a young woman. The gates loomed, immense and foreboding. Beyond them, a world of gilded cages and perfumed prisons. I turned one last time to look at Mordecai, his face a study in quiet concern. He would watch over me, I knew. He would stay close to the gate, gathering what news he could. He was my only link to the life I was leaving behind. Inside the palace walls, the air instantly changed. It was cooler, laden with the scent of unfamiliar perfumes, of myrrh and frankincense, of sandalwood and jasmine. The floors were polished marble, reflecting the intricate patterns of the ceilings. Servants, silent as shadows, moved through the corridors, their robes rustling softly. It was a world designed to impress, to overwhelm, to make one forget any life that existed outside its opulent embrace. Haggai, a man with a kind face but eyes that saw everything, met us. He was surprisingly gentle, given his position. He explained the process, a year of purification, a year of treatments, 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics. A year. My goodness. It sounded like an eternity, an elaborate ritual designed to transform ordinary women into potential queens. It was both absurd and strangely comforting in its meticulousness. At least I would be clean, if nothing else. I was led to my new quarters, one of many rooms in the women's house. Each girl had her own small space, but the walls felt thin, and the whispers of other young women, a mix of hope and anxiety, drifted through the air. There were girls from every province, each one beautiful in her own way. Some were bold, eager for the chance to catch the king's eye. Others were quiet, like me, simply trying to navigate this strange new existence. The routine began. Mornings, a bath in fragrant waters, then a procession of servants, each with their own task. Oils massaged into the skin, hair brushed until it shone, nails meticulously cleaned and polished. It was a strange sort of pampering, one that felt more like preparation for a sacrifice than a luxury. I tried to remain detached, to view it as a necessary performance. The oil of myrrh, thick and earthy, was the first step. It seeped into the skin, leaving a lasting scent. Then came the perfumes, floral and sweet, designed to enhance, to conceal, to transform. I learned to endure the endless hours of grooming, the discussions about the latest styles of headwear, the subtle art of applying kohl to the eyes. It was a crash course in royal aesthetics, and I found myself observing it all with a quiet, almost detached curiosity. Haggai, surprisingly, took a liking to me. Perhaps it was my quiet demeanor, my lack of demanding fuss, or simply the way I listened more than I spoke. He granted me 7 specially chosen maids from the palace, and he moved me to the best place in the harem. A small kindness, but one that felt significant in this new, bewildering world. I still kept my secret. My Hebrew name, Hadassah, remained unspoken. My family, my people, a quiet truth held close to my heart. Esther, I introduced myself, the name they had given me, a Persian name meaning star. It felt like a costume, one I wore daily, a part I played. And yet, I wondered, who was I becoming in this strange, glittering prison? Mordecai, true to his word, would walk back and forth in front of the court of the women's house every day to find out how I was and what was happening to me. A silent sentinel, a constant reminder that I was not truly alone, that someone remembered the Hadassah beneath the Esther. His presence was a quiet comfort, a thread connecting me to my past. The days blurred into weeks, and the weeks into months. The year of purification stretched out, a long, perfumed vigil. I watched the other girls, their hopes and anxieties playing out on their faces. Some were impatient, eager for their turn before the king. Others grew despondent, realizing the odds were stacked against them. Only one could be queen. When it was a girl's turn to go into King Xerxes, she could take with her anything she desired from the women's house to the palace. Jewels, silks, elaborate headpieces. It was her chance to make an impression. I watched them, laden with finery, their faces a mixture of anticipation and dread, disappear through the heavy doors that led to the king's private chambers. And then they would return, their expressions often unreadable, carrying the weight of what had transpired. Few were ever called back. My own turn approached with the slow, inevitable creep of a desert shadow. I felt no grand ambition, no burning desire for a crown, only a profound sense of duty and a quiet prayer for guidance. What could a simple girl from the exiles offer a king of such immense power? What could I possibly do but simply be myself, whatever that meant in this elaborate charade? Haggai, with his knowing eyes, offered me advice, suggesting what might please the king. But I found myself requesting nothing beyond what he advised. Simplicity, I thought. Perhaps simplicity in this world of excess would be its own kind of statement. And so, the day came. The heavy door opened. The scent of myrrh and frankincense, which had become so familiar, seemed to intensify. My heart beat a little faster, a soft drum against my ribs. I walked forward, not with the swagger of ambition, but with the quiet dignity Mordecai had taught me. To walk in faith, even when the path ahead is shrouded in mist. I remember the vastness of the hall, the richness of the colors, the glow of the oil lamps. And then King Xerxes, seated on his throne, his gaze sweeping over me. A powerful man, yes, but also, in that moment, just a man, looking for something to fill a void. And I, just a girl, standing before him, holding a secret that could mean life or death. My time with the king was, in its own way, a blur of impressions. His questions were gentle, his demeanor surprisingly thoughtful. I spoke softly, answering with honesty, weaving in the quiet wisdom Mordecai had instilled in me. I did not try to dazzle or to flatter, but simply to be. And something in that quiet authenticity, perhaps, resonated with him. For I found favor in the eyes of everyone who saw me. It was not a beauty that demanded attention, but one that seemed to invite trust, a quiet grace that put people at ease. And so it was with the king. He found me more pleasing than all the other virgins. He extended his golden scepter, a sign of acceptance, of favor. And then he placed the royal crown on my head. Queen, me, Hadassah, Esther, a queen in a foreign land, holding a secret so profound it felt like a fragile bird cupped in my hands. A queen, living in a palace, yet still tethered by invisible threads to the quiet wisdom of my cousin Mordecai, who still paced outside the gate, watching, waiting, ever vigilant. The absurdity of it all was not lost on me. A quiet laugh bubbled up, quickly suppressed, for this was no place for open mirth. This was a gilded cage, and I, a bird with a secret song. The king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. Esther's feast, he called it. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts lavishly, as befitting a king celebrating his new queen. It was another spectacle, another grand display of power and celebration. And I, the quiet girl, sat at the center of it all, smiling, nodding, and holding my breath. Even after I was taken to the palace, to the harem, I remembered Mordecai's charge. I had not revealed my family or my people, just as Mordecai had instructed. His words were a constant echo in my mind, a quiet reminder of the true identity hidden beneath the royal robes. It was a heavy burden, this secret, a constant hum of awareness beneath the surface of my new, opulent life. Mordecai, ever diligent, continued his vigil at the king's gate. He sat among the other officials, a familiar fixture, his presence a silent comfort to me, even if I could not speak to him directly. He would often pass along messages through Haggai, subtle questions about my well-being, quiet reminders of caution. Our bond remained unbroken, a lifeline in this sea of splendor. It was during this time, as I settled into the bewildering rhythms of court life, that a different kind of whisper began to circulate from the gate. Mordecai, in his constant vigilance, overheard something. Two of the king's officers, Bigthana and Teresh, who guarded the doorway, were angry enough to conspire to assassinate King Xerxes. Mordecai, with his keen ear and his unwavering loyalty, heard their hushed plans. He immediately sent word to me. The news was chilling. The king, my husband, was in danger, and I, the quiet girl, was now in a position to do something. I, Esther, the queen, relayed the information to King Xerxes in Mordecai's name. The matter was investigated, the plot confirmed, and the two conspirators were impaled on poles. A swift and brutal justice, characteristic of the Persian court. And the entire account was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. A quiet victory, a small act of service, a confirmation that perhaps, even in this gilded cage, I could be of some use. Life in the palace resumed its luxurious, predictable pace. The days were filled with the rustle of silk, the clinking of jewelry, the quiet commands of servants. I learned the protocols, the intricate dance of court etiquette. I hosted gatherings for the women, presided over small ceremonies, and fulfilled my duties as queen. But beneath it all, the secret pulsed, a quiet, insistent rhythm. My identity, my people, a part of me hidden away, waiting. And then, a new shadow began to fall across the sun-drenched courtyards of Susa. A man named Haman. He arrived with a strut, an arrogance that bristled like a porcupine's quills, demanding obeisance from all. And in his shadow, a new threat began to stir, one that would test the very limits of my quiet courage. Haman. The name itself seemed to carry a certain weight, a heavy, unpleasant sound that resonated through the marble halls. He was the son of Hamadatha, an Agagite, and the king, in his boundless wisdom, or perhaps simply in a moment of arbitrary favor, had promoted him, elevated him above all the other princes, a man of sudden, immense power, and one who wielded it with an almost childish glee. The king commanded that all royal officials at the king's gate kneel down and pay honor to Haman, and they did. Every single one, their heads bowed, their bodies in deference. All, that is, except one. Mordecai. My quiet, principled cousin, who sat at the gate, observed, and refused to bow. I heard the whispers from my maids, from the servants who flitted through the palace like colorful birds. Mordecai does not bow to Haman. It was a scandal, an outrage. Haman, swelling with his new authority, could not tolerate such a slight. His face, I heard, would turn a mottled purple with rage. He was a man whose ego was as vast as the Persian Empire itself, and Mordecai's refusal was a direct challenge to its very foundations. "Why do you transgress the king's command?" the other officials would demand of Mordecai. Day after day, they would ask him, and day after day, he would simply explain that he was a Jew. A quiet declaration, yet one that thundered in its implication. He could not bow to a man when his heart and his knees belonged to God alone. It was a matter of principle, a testament to his unwavering faith, and it placed him, and by extension, me, in terrible danger. When Haman learned of Mordecai's heritage, his anger became a raging inferno. It was not enough to punish Mordecai alone. Oh no, Haman's pride demanded a far grander, far more devastating retribution. He sought to destroy all the Jews throughout the entire kingdom of Xerxes, a chilling ambition, a genocidal decree born from one man's bruised ego. He cast lots, the pur, to determine the day and month for this terrible deed. The lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar, 11 months away, 11 months for an entire people to live under the shadow of death. He then approached the king, his voice, I imagine, dripping with feigned concern. "There is a certain people," he began, not naming us, "dispersed and scattered among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, whose customs are different from those of all other people, and who do not obey the king's laws. It is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. If it pleases the king," he continued smoothly, "let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury." 10,000 talents of silver. An astronomical sum, a bribe, pure and simple, to extinguish an entire people. And the king, perhaps weary, perhaps trusting, or perhaps simply not fully comprehending the true horror of what he was being asked to do, took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman. "The money and the people are yours," he said, in essence. "Do with them as you please." My heart chills even now at the thought. The king's ring, the symbol of absolute authority, given to a man consumed by hatred. The decree was then written, sealed with the king's ring and dispatched by couriers to all the provinces, to annihilate, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and little children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. The news reached Susa like a clap of thunder. I, within the palace walls, was initially shielded from the full horror of it. But then, my eunuchs, my trusted servants, began to whisper of Mordecai. He was outside the king's gate, tearing his clothes, dressed in sackcloth and ashes, crying loudly and bitterly, a sight that tore at my heart. My quiet, dignified cousin, brought to such a public display of grief. I sent clothes to him, hoping to soothe him, to coax him back to his usual composure. But he refused them. He would not be comforted. His message to me, carried by Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, was stark. He sent me a copy of the decree, detailing its brutal contents. "Go in to the king," he urged, "and plead with him for your people." The words hit me like a physical blow. Your people. The secret I had guarded so carefully, the truth of my identity, was now laid bare, and with it, a terrifying responsibility. I, Esther, the quiet girl, was being called to use my voice, to risk everything, for the very people I had been instructed to conceal. My immediate reaction was fear, overwhelming, paralyzing fear. All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death, unless the king extends the golden scepter to him and spares his life. And I have not been summoned to go to the king for 30 days. 30 days. 30 days of silence, of being out of his favor, out of his immediate thoughts. To approach him unbidden was a death sentence. It was not courage that filled me, but the cold dread of certain demise. I sent my reply to Mordecai, laying bare my fears, my very real predicament. Mordecai's response, however, was not one of sympathy, but of unwavering conviction. His words, delivered through Hathach, still echo in my memory, a powerful challenge that cut through my fear. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? For such a time as this. The words settled in my heart, heavy and profound. It was not about me, not about my comfort or my fear or my life. It was about something far greater. Providence, the silent, invisible hand of God, moving through the lives of ordinary people, placing them in positions they could never have imagined, for purposes they could barely comprehend. My quiet life, my forced entrance into the palace, my unexpected crown, all of it, perhaps, had been leading to this single, terrifying moment. My fear did not vanish. Oh no, it remained, a cold knot in my stomach. But something else stirred alongside it, a resolve, a flicker of courage, fueled by Mordecai's faith and the weight of my people's plight. I knew what I had to do. "Go," I sent back to Mordecai, my voice, though relayed through another, imbued with a newfound strength. "Gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. If I perish, I perish." The words were not an act of bravado, but a sober acceptance. A surrender to the will of God, whatever the outcome. I understood that my life was no longer my own. It belonged to my people and to the God who had placed me here. The fasting began. 3 days, no food, no water, a time of intense prayer, of spiritual preparation. My maids, though they did not know the full extent of the danger, sensed the gravity of the moment. We knelt together in our quiet chambers, pouring out our hearts to the God of Israel, the God of our ancestors, the God who had delivered us from so many perils before. The palace, usually bustling with activity, seemed to hold its breath. Even the perfumes seemed subdued. On the third day, after the fasting, I dressed myself in my royal robes, not the most ostentatious, but robes designed to convey dignity, respect, and perhaps a hint of vulnerability. I walked through the familiar corridors, past the intricate tapestries, the gleaming statues, my heart pounding a rhythm against my ribs. Each step was a prayer, each breath a plea. I entered the inner court of the palace, directly opposite the king's hall. The silence was deafening. The air hung heavy with expectation. And there he was, King Xerxes, seated on his royal throne, facing the entrance. His eyes, when they met mine, held no immediate warmth, no recognition, just the gaze of a powerful ruler observing an unexpected intrusion. My breath caught in my throat. This was the moment, life or death. Would he lift his scepter, or would he simply turn away, a silent command for my swift removal, my execution? My eyes, I imagine, must have pleaded with him, silently, desperately. And then, a movement, slow, deliberate. He extended the golden scepter toward me. Oh, the relief that washed over me. A wave so profound it almost buckled my knees. Life. He had granted me life. I approached and touched the tip of the scepter. A small gesture, but one filled with immense significance. "What is it, Queen Esther?" the king asked, his voice calmer now, perhaps even a touch curious. "What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given you." Half the kingdom. A generous, impulsive offer, typical of Xerxes. But I had not come for half the kingdom. I had come for something far more precious. Yet, I knew better than to rush. Mordecai had taught me patience, the art of subtle persuasion. The time was not yet right for the full truth. "If it pleases the king," I said, my voice, I hoped, steady and calm, "let the king and Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." Haman. I included him, of course. To exclude him would be to raise suspicion. To invite him was to draw him closer, to put him at ease, to lull him into a false sense of security. The trap was being laid, delicately, precisely. The king readily agreed. Haman was summoned. The first banquet was a quiet affair, a preliminary dance. We ate, we drank, we made polite conversation. The king, perhaps enjoying the novelty of a queen who actually prepared something for him, was in good spirits. Again, the question. "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It will be granted you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be done." Still not the moment. "My petition and my request is this," I replied, a small smile, I hope, playing on my lips. "If the king is pleased to grant my petition and carry out my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." Another delay, another day for Haman to swell with pride, to savor his elevated status, to feel invincible. He left the banquet that day, I heard, in high spirits, boasting to his friends about the queen's special favor. "The queen has invited no one but me to come with the king to the banquet she prepared," he crowed. "And tomorrow also I am invited by her along with the king." But then, as he passed the king's gate, he saw Mordecai, still sitting there, still refusing to bow. Haman's joy turned to bitter rage. He went home, summoned his friends and his wife, Zeresh, and began to boast of his vast wealth, his many sons, and how the king had promoted him above all the other officials. "And that's not all," he exclaimed. I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave tomorrow." But then the poison of Mordecai's defiance seeped into his triumph. "Yet all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." His wife, ever eager to fuel his ambition and cruelty, offered a suggestion. "Have a pole set up, 50 cubits high, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then you can go to the banquet with the king and be happy." The idea pleased Haman, and he ordered the pole to be built. A truly monstrous pride, one that could not tolerate even the smallest slight, even at the cost of another's life. But that night, the King Xerxes could not sleep. Oh, the irony. The man who held the fate of an entire people in his hands, tossing and turning in his luxurious bed. He called for the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought and read to him. Perhaps the drone of the reader's voice would lull him to sleep. And in that book, the reader came across the account of Mordecai, the quiet official who had uncovered the plot of Bigthana and Teresh to assassinate the king. "What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" the king asked. His attendants replied, "Nothing has been done for him." A kingly oversight, a debt unpaid. Just at that moment, Haman entered the outer court of the palace, coming to ask the king to have Mordecai impaled on the pole he had just set up. "Who is in the court?" the king asked. His attendants replied, "Haman is standing in the court." "Bring him in," the king commanded. Haman entered, brimming with his murderous request. But before he could speak, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Haman, in his inflated vanity, immediately thought, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" Of course, it could only be him. He puffed up, no doubt, and proceeded to list every conceivable honor. "Let them bring royal robes the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Let the robes and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them array the man the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse through the city square, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" The king listened, nodded, and then delivered the crushing blow. "Go at once," he commanded. "Get the robes and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended." Imagine Haman's face, the blood draining from it, the horror, the utter humiliation. To not only honor his sworn enemy, but to do it himself, to lead Mordecai through the city, proclaiming his greatness. It was a masterpiece of poetic justice, orchestrated by the sleepless night of a king and the unseen hand of God. Haman, defeated and utterly humiliated, did as he was commanded. He led Mordecai through the city, proclaiming his honor. And then he rushed home, his head covered in shame, to tell his wife and his friends of this catastrophic turn of events. If Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, his wise men and his wife Zeresh told him, you will not overcome him. You will surely fall before him. Even as they were speaking, the king's eunuchs arrived to hurry Haman to the second banquet, the one I had prepared. The stage was set, the players were in place, and I, Esther, the quiet queen, held the fate of my people in my trembling hands.